Hello again, this is Philip at thebest3d.com, and I'd like to show you a little bit more on how to load and work with AVI files or animations in general, specifically to slow down an animation that was rendered. And it is already pretty slow. It is an animation that took about 2.5 days to render. If you are a Carrara user, you may recognize this as Howie's snow scene. And what I've done is simply placed the camera through the scene and rendered a few seconds worth of this animation, but it's got a lot of very high detail content and some special effects, and so it took about 2.5 days to render. And the total frame count here is 718, as we can see here. The dimensions of the images, or the frames, we can see under the image menu with image info, and it is 640 by 360. So very standard dimensions here for some video clips. And what we'll do is we will take a portion of that scene and then work with that. So what I'm thinking of doing is perhaps grabbing about from here to about here. So let's go and set the in marker at about this point, and there you go, in marker, and then go to the last one, out marker. So we have selected that section, and you can see it highlighted in blue here somewhere. There you go, that's the in marker, and it goes all the way to the end. And we can right click on that and simply select delete this block, right? So when you set an in marker and the out point, in point, out point, you define a block, and that block is now being deleted. And as you can see here, it's going through the deletion process frame by frame to eliminate that particular block. And so in the end, we will have a shorter animation of 193 frames, the last one being 192, the first one being 0. And let's say I want to remove a few at the beginning as well here. So let's say we want to start here, so that will be the block we need to remove from the first to this particular current frame. And so we'll say that's the out marker, and then let's go to the in marker at the beginning. So now we have another block identified, and that's this one here that starts from here and goes to this one here, as you see in blue. So I'm going to delete that the same way, right click here and delete block. So these frame level operations, by the way, you can do those also from the animation menu under frames, right? All of these, this menu here is what you see also when you right click on the timeline images and you see these options. So one thing that you might want to do, for instance, is first of all play this a little bit faster. Right now I think it's at maybe 24 frames a second. Click on FPS here and I will show you the frames per second. Sure enough, 24. Let's go to 30, and that way it's a little bit smoother and a little bit faster. There's a little bit of twinkling, a little bit of jittering. We'll see how to address that, especially on this tree up here in this area. If you look at that, there's a little bit of noise here, and we'll find a way to reduce that. But most importantly, one thing we do want to do is really slow it down tremendously. Now, as we've seen in the past, we could do simply the frame blending. And before we start working with this, we'll save this short animation. So we'll go to Save AVI, and we'll say, okay, where do we want to save that? Doesn't really matter. I have it actually saved somewhere already. We'll just go through the process here. Select your frames per second at which it should play back and save it. Now at that point you'll want to indicate what is your codec. If you need it lossless, you could save it uncompressed, full frames, or you could save it as Lagarif. I'm using the French version of Windows 8 here, by the way, which is why I have some of the dialogues in French. But Lagarif is a good codec to use also to keep it compressed to small size, but still without loss. It's lossless. So that's a great choice to work with as well. Now, not all other applications will know how to decompress it, but while you're working in Dogwaffle, it's a great working format that keeps small file size and also keeps it lossless. So what you could do is perhaps indicate you want to make it go faster even with multi-threading. And stay with RGB as the output. You can actually save it with alpha here, but we don't have animated alpha in this version quite yet, so there's no point in doing that. So let's save it like this, and so we have a little animation, a shorter version of this animation, and that's what we will be using. And you can see play here in Irfan view. Perfect. Alright, so now I'm going to use actually the same one that I had saved a little bit earlier in preparation. So let's go to load AVI, and part 1, there it is. That's the the clip that I had initially isolated to do exactly that same exercise. And you can see here it is. All right, so a couple of things we might want to do. First of all, slow it down. And as you remember, we can right-click here and see something like time stretch. And when you do time stretch, there's a brute force quick approach. If you, for instance, want to stretch it 10 times, you want to slow it down 10 times, right? What you would do is simply say multiply 10 times, or maybe even 11 times. Why not? Apply a factor of 11 to this. And so the number of frames, the new number of total frames would be about 1056. And you can say, okay, I want to frame blend. Now what's going to happen if you do that is that the pixels that are already at the current pixels will be gradually replaced with the next frame pixel values. And so if you have one that's black and as you move it goes white or bright to the next color on the next frame, well, it will have those 10 or 11 frames in between during which it can make that transition. And that will be potentially okay, but in many cases will lead to sort of a roping or a strobing effect. It will look like it's strobe lights blinking. Let's just do that once so we can once again see that. This is something that unfortunately is a known side effect of pure frame blending. And when you look at it in a static mode here, it looks okay, but the moment you play it softly, you can see that it's blending one frame out and blending the next frame in. And so it's doing this very nasty and annoying strobe effect. I mean, if you are sensitive to strobe lights and you get seizures, this is typically what it might look like, or what it might start, what might trigger it. So not a good idea to go with this. So let's go back to the loading the AVI part 1. There it is. And this time what we'll do instead is we'll say, well, let's go and strobe light it. How about if we don't do a big stretch immediately, right? Let's say we go in small increments. We start at 96 and we'll go 50% up, so it'll be about 148. And go that. So now we have a little bit of a longer animation, not much longer, and not that much of strobing. Still a little bit. Question is, will it get better or will it get worse as we keep doing that, right? Because maybe that's an idea that we've seen, is that same with resampling an image. If you take an image that's let's say 1,000 pixels wide and you want to sample it up to 4,000 pixels wide, instead of going directly to 4,000 pixels wide, one of the techniques recommended at times is to say, well, let's go into 1,500 first, and then 2,000, and then 2,500, and then 3,000, and then 3,500, and eventually 4,000 pixels. So you go several steps so that it doesn't have a sudden jump in that resample. And it might be tempting to think that this will also benefit by going gradually up to 100 frames. And so if you do that a few times, you time stretch it and say, okay, 222, let's go to 333, but multiply it by about 1.5 every time, and you will eventually be close to 1,000. Let's say 444. Doesn't have to be the exact number there, 1.5 times, but the reality is that that's not going to make a big difference. It still is going to have sort of a strobing effect. Let's see where we are right now. You can tell here there's a lot of little sort of video transition noise, right? See how it's flickering? And that's just really annoying, especially out here. Look at that. This is like some sort of swimming effect or some sort of, it's just awful. And there's really nothing you can do with it. That's a limitation of frame blending. When it's moving too fast and there's repetitive patterns, there's like a pattern, or a what's the right word here? It's some sort of an interference pattern, right? An interference effect that you see here. And you can't really avoid that, and it would be a much better approach to actually not do a frame blending, but rather a frame pushing, to move the image. Because really the image itself is not changing so much, we are just doing a transition with the camera as we're looking down. So this is a perfect place where we want to use motion prediction. If we analyze the image and decompose it into small squares, and every square we tack a motion predictor on, we can estimate which way each of these elements go. And to visualize it, we could go here and say, okay, let's show the blocks here, and imagine each of those little blocks, we mark them as a motion prediction or a motion detector. We place a motion detector on this one, and on this one, and another one here, and another one here, and we keep looking for where these elements move as the animation progresses. And so that's what the motion prediction module will do for us. So let's see how that works. Again, I'm going to start with the original animation here, load the AVI part 1. And we have only a 96 frame sequence here. And what I'll do is go now to the, let's move that over here, filter, animated motion prediction module. Right? We've seen this one a lot, and I'm just never getting tired of it. This is really good stuff. I'm going to go with dry run and do a quick test first. And this will now generate just 3 times the number of frames, roughly. And you see already there, this animation is much smoother. It doesn't have that strobing effect. Let's slow it down even more. Let's go 10 times or 11 times. Okay, that's 1035. Much better. Look at that. So clean in this animation. Now, there are some parts where it's still going to be iffy, and that's, for instance, on the edges. Nothing you can do about that. This is one of the edge conditions of this algorithm, is you will not get rid of the strobing along the edges. So the edge condition, we're going to need to block that out. We're going to need to blur it out, or we're going to want to crop it out. And then simply resample the image up to the ultimate final destination or dimensions. But the benefit here is absolutely amazing when you look at how smooth this animation is. And when you think about how long this took to render initially, the animation took 2.5 days. So that particular part is only about 30% or 20% of the animation. So maybe this took 5, 6 hours or 8 hours. Well, still, instead of rendering now 10 times as many frames, which would have come back to another 2 or 3 days, I can do this in just a few seconds, and it looks absolutely, acceptable. It's good enough. The one thing that I also like is that if we look at down here, there's a little bit of strobing, perhaps a little bit of flickering happening. Oh, actually, no, nothing much really. It's pretty good. So we can use that perhaps with a final refinement pass here. Let's go undo that, and dry run is off. We can go and render that. So we now have a much slower animation in progress. It is doing the final render now with the refinement pass. And that's really a good way to go about it. You do initially without the refinement pass. It pre-calculates the best it can in the fast mode. And then when you go into out of the dry run into the final render, you enable the refinement pass, and it will get you some additional clarity and quality on top of that. Now, so again, one thing we will need to do at the end is crop out the edges, but we're not quite there yet. There's one more thing we can do. I wanted to look at those trees in the foreground to have a little bit of flickering there, because they already did in the original frames, right? So that's not flicker introduced by the slowing down with the motion prediction module. It's actually something that is already reduced by the motion prediction module, because we now have 10 frames where it's transitioning from one to the next. And the nice thing about having this slower animation is that we can afford to do, if you look at this area here, right? If you look at this area here, there is far less movement now, but there still is a little bit. So we can get rid of that now with a little bit of, what's the next tool? Hold on, let me close this here. We're done with that. In fact, before I move on, let me save this one again. So save this AVI or image sequence, whichever way you prefer. Let's save this AVI here, and I'm going to call this my AVI2. Make sure we have the right name here. Save this and keep it again as a logarithm. There you go, just in case we need to go back to that. And so the next thing I want to do is focus on that tree and see if we can reduce that a little bit. It was already in the original having some noise in there. It was basically, when I rendered it, I didn't use the best, highest quality of anti-aliasing, so it had a little bit of aliasing noise. And it still shows, although it's much less intense, but it still shows afterwards, after doing the motion prediction slowdown there. So if I look at this area here, how can we reduce the flicker that's going on here? Well, one thing that we can do is basically average the frames between the next frame and the prior frame, or maybe 2 or 3 or 4 of them. We can basically do a little bit of a ghosting. And it's going to be, you would say, well, it's going to leave trails, motion trails. But the movement is so slow, so minute that you might not see really a tearing or a trail, but you will see that it's reducing the flicker, because from one frame to the next, it is not going to have these pixels suddenly change so much. It's going to average them. So let's go do that with the motion prediction, with the ghosting. That's one of the last animated group here in the timeline. So that's basically what you do here. You click on timeline and you go down to the animator group where the ghost image is, and you can see up to 4. I'm going to do just 2 initially, and that's going to be a little bit faster. And then we're going to say, let's get just 2 frames averaged out and see how much better it gets with that. So what we're doing now is, and actually this algorithm is working backwards, it's taking 2 frames and averaging them, and then the next 2 frames and averaging. It's actually not really averaging them, it's giving more dominance to the current frame and less to the next frame, and then even less to the next one after that. If you had 3 or 4 on the ghosting, it would gradually decrease the dominance of that. But what you can see here is that there is a little bit of less of that motion now. And let's go perhaps increase it to 3 or 4 even. Okay, let's do 3, and that might already be enough. Basically, the idea is to do a little bit of ghosting to, even though it's introducing some motion, some trails, because the movement is so slow, it may not be noticeable. It may not be disturbing, but it's going to have the benefit of doing a little bit of pixel averaging, and so in that sense it's going to slow down. We'll still have a little bit of that, and of course some of that is the motion prediction module displacement here. So, but that's still good. And then the next thing we want to do is reverse this animation, right? Instead of coming down with the camera, how about we go up? And then as we go up, we'll also want to see the sun up there. So we'll need, of course, the sun in the original scene was on the right side. As you can see there, we have the shadow being cast to the left, so the sun was behind us on the right side a little bit. But we are going to ignore that. In fact, perhaps we'll go from here and then just move up. So we can ignore that, or we can say, well, we are on a different planet with 2 suns, or maybe a bright moon will be up there too. So whatever it is, let's first of all reverse the animation. That's another one of those frame operations you can do here, reverse frames right there. And so that's a quick one right there. And I remember this one in particular because that was my code that I put in there long ago. I think at version 1.6 or 2.0 or something like that. This goes back about 10 years. The 0.01% of my code in this project. The other thing that we have that we want to do now is, so we're playing it in this way now, where we're looking up to the sky, and we want to add the sun light. So let's go back to the timeline and add a little bit of the lens flares. Okay, so let's go to the animated group again down here, lens flare at the very bottom, and there is a sun here that we can preview. Let's go to the flare settings to see a different type of sun, perhaps this one here, perhaps one of those. Let's see, that one looks cleaner, kind of bluish, makes it cool. That one, oh, that one's pretty good. Let's use that. And then we can change the size of it too. So let's go not too big, something like this. It's easy to overdo the thing with the lens flares. So one thing we'll need to do is actually position it and keyframe it. So let's say we want the sun right over here, right? And initially it's invisible. There you go. And so we need to reduce the level to gone. And that will be at the beginning, and somewhere around here it will start coming into frame. But somewhere before that we'll already start seeing the glow. So we'll go about here initially with 0 level, and then as we go to about this place, we'll be still outside the frame, but we'll increase the level so that we start seeing the glow. And we'll mark that keyframe. And then we'll go here. By the way, you can increase the size of this if you want more granularity on this, and you can also zoom in. There's a zoom option here to zoom in on that timeline to have a little bit more detail on there. And so now here we want to make sure that we're going to keep it roughly at the same place in the space. So we need to reposition the sun a little bit. You know, keep an eye maybe relative to this tree here, somewhere up there is where it's at, and we need to make it go a little bit brighter still. There you go, and mark that one, and then here the sun needs to stay down there, and maybe one last time we'll make it go bigger, and that will be as bright as it gets. And so let's continue here our march to the top. The sun stays there, and level stays about the same, and then gradually we can, as the sun moves out of the scene, we can also move, there it is, there's the sun already out of the scene, and we can start reducing the brightness. Right, something like this, keyframe that again, and then soon enough we'll be on the very last frame, and the sun is again totally out. And here's the last frame. Oh, by the way, there is one frame at the end we'll need to cut out, because that's one of the side effects also of the motion prediction module. Is that what used to be the firm frame, since we reversed it, the first frame is now at the last frame, and that actually caused also, that last frame also is a copy of the very last frame before the reversal. That's at the end of the motion prediction module. So we still have to deal with that, and cropping the edges as well. Anyway, let's go apply. Now, if we're not quite sure, let's go save undo so that we can undo that. So let's go apply it with the save undo. Yeah, see, I had a little bit of motion visible there on the sun. I do this in a hurry right now just for the demo, so it's clearly not going to be as perfect as it could be or should be, but it still gives you an idea of some other things you can do there. Alright, so let's go and hunt down those extra frames. The first one is good. The last one is where we need to do a little bit of cleanup, because that's after the reversal. It's the last one now, but it's really we need to delete this one and perhaps a few more, because the ghosting transition shows over 4 frames. So now we're good. Okay, so now we have, let's see what we do at this point. Let's get rid of these previews and play it, and play it at 100% full size. There you go. Alright, so now the key thing really when you do something like this is to think, you know, is the sun somewhere, is this really the sun, or is this a bright UFO, or is this some other street light or something? So where is it supposed to stay relative to the scene? If you move the camera around, where is the sun going to be? So that's one thing. There's tons of other things you might want to do. Maybe add a little bit of snowfall. So let's go perhaps add another one of the animated, there it is, snowfall. And this animated snowfall, we can perhaps have it come down very loosely, maybe a lot of it. You see the preview here with a lot of the snow, just a little bit, and very turbulent but very slow speed. So maybe make it drift perhaps a little bit to the left, but low velocity, so it really comes down slowly. This is after the storm kind of thing, right? And so let's go size it down also. And actually no, we'll do some big ones, a few of those, and then a lot of the small ones, but we'll keep them in the background. So let's apply that. That's probably a little bit too fast. Let's go play it back though and see. Oh no, it's actually perfect. Look at that. It's slowing down slow, and it looks like snowflakes that are relatively close by here. Now the next thing I want to do is have a few more in the background. So it looks like there's still a little bit more snowfall over there. The thing though, I don't want it in front of the trees. I want it only on the upper right corner there. So the way to do that, unfortunately right now we don't have a moving alpha channel yet. That's probably going to come soon, maybe in version 9. I'm hoping, I'm crossing my fingers here. But we all could use that as a great feature to animate a sequence of frames that contains the moving alpha channel. Just like we have the moving swap channel, we can already do that. But here in this case, what I'll do is I'll simply use the lasso tool and say, let's select something like this. Right? So we have selected this upper right corner, and perhaps we can show that selection. There you go. Perhaps a little bit more, something like that. And then also blur it. We don't need this very crisp transition on the alpha channel. Let's go and blur it with this thing like that, although that's going to blur to the inside here from the edge as well. So maybe another approach would actually be, let me do Control D to clear this alpha. The other approach perhaps would be to right click on this tool here with the rainbow and find the selection fader tool. So you select and fade, and you can say, okay, I'm going to select everything in this upper right corner and then fade to the side. So I'm allowing the rendering of snowflakes in the upper right corner. Let's do that again, perhaps even closer to the trees. There you go, and into the trees. So that's basically going to allow me to have something like this area here possible for additional rendering. And watch what's going on here. I'm going to increase the snowfall amount, and there's just more snowflakes now here and no new ones being added in front of the foreground. So I can reduce also the size of the snowflakes and perhaps have something like a little bit less velocity and a little bit more wind speed. Let's say we have a blizzard still going on in the background there, and so we'll go and render that, and there you go. So right now, of course, it's showing, as it's rendering, it's showing the existing flakes that we already had in the first pass, but we do have now some additionals that are being rendered, and we can do that a few times. Let's keep rendering there. Let's go apply again. So soon enough we'll have just a massive amount of snowflakes piling up in the background. Now ideally, again, we would also have some in this area here on the top side, but we don't have animated alpha on that quite yet. So that would be something we could actually do. Excuse me, correction. We could actually do that with the curve tool and then rotoscope it into the alpha channel. All right, so correction, shame on me. We could actually do this. We could go with the curve tool and draw the curve, and let's say position ourselves to around here, all right, and draw a curve that will go, for instance, something like this. Avoid the tree, come back around the tree, something like this. And this is a curve that can be animated. And you can close it, and you can map it to alpha. And that would be all under the rotor tools, right? So you can map it to alpha, and also even do a Gaussian blur on it. Use the curve as alpha, and then blur it with Gaussian blur or even motion blur. There's all sorts of different options here. But the beauty of this is that that can actually allow you to keyframe the progression of the the selection. Right, so with that, and we'll do a different tutorial on that. That's a really great feature to explore and fully understand as well. So let's go back to what we currently have here. We now have a little bit more of a snowfall, especially on the right side here. I'll do one more with a little bit more size. Increase this one more time, and wait, we need to have that alpha channel here. So let me do this. I'm going to go with the original way of doing the selection fader, and this time I'll give it a little bit more on the upper area here. So I'll say something like this here is fine to also show some of the there you go, or maybe even less here. Control D, something like so. There you go. So we'll also have a few more snowflakes. Okay, all right, and then go render there, and so we'll render one more batch of snowflakes in this area. So now we have a lot of snow happening in the background, or what seems to be the background, and Control D will clear that. Let's make sure we have keyboard focus. There you go. So we have a lot of small snowflakes in the background, a lot more even here on the right side, and as we play this, it will look like we do have still some pretty decent storm going on in the upper area here, and whereas in the foreground here we have less. Now one thing also is that the white snowflakes, we don't see them anymore when they're in the very bright, in front of the bright snow. So what we could do here is actually do a pass where the snowflakes are darker, and you can do that right here. You can reduce the brightness a little bit, and now you'll see them here, and let's make sure we don't have too many of them, but keep them relatively large, and a few of them, and then also reduce the wind speed, because we don't want them to be, we want them to be basically looking like they're drifting a little bit. So wind speed going down, and the turbulence fairly high still, the velocity very low. Oh, the wind speed can be actually okay, close to 0, or maybe even the other way. There you go, and apply that. So these are going in the front, and they are going to be a little bit darker, so now you can see them right here as well. Okay. All right, so that's where we can take that, and then there's a lot more. There's lots of filters that we can apply here. We can do something like, oh no, not that. Some of the photographic filters. So some of the filters. Hold on a second. Okay, so here's a couple more light diffusion. Of course, if it's kind of gloomy, you want to add some light diffusion. You know, if it's like a dark evening. If you've ever gone skiing and you've missed the last chairlift or ski lift back home, back down to the village, you know what I mean? It's kind of cold, it's kind of gloomy. There's still a lot of you're starting to get snow blind, you know, that kind of feeling. So the white is permeating into the darks, and that's what you want to do with the light diffusion. You want to give that impression where it's getting a little bit blurry when it's bright, and the bright parts will sort of bleed into the darker parts. So that's done with the light diffusion. There are a couple of other things. Let's say you want to actually show it's the sun has already gone down and you want to now turn this into a night scene or a dark late evening scene, even though it's only 3 or 4 p.m., right? But in the winter, that's what happens. And so what you can do is you can go to day for night. Day for night will give it more, will reduce the saturation and also make it a little bit less contrasty and make it a little bit darker. And so let's keep that one without the undo because I'm okay without it. And what basically happens here is that we now have, you know, lots of other filters we can use to just make it even more and more different from the original. Sunset, if you want to add a little bit of sunset look, that will give it a kind of a reddish tint to the bottom and a bluish tint to a reddish tint to the top. Or another one, the fog, if you want to give it more of a bluish tint to the bottom, kind of a cold bluish tint. All right, so let's say we finish this. This is the final render that we will use, and now we still have the edges that we need to account for that were left with the flicker, you know, the roping or the strobing here along the edges. It's barely visible now because of all the other filterings we've been doing, but it's still there. So how do we get rid of that? Well, simply select the rectangular area here, the rectangle selection tool, and find a scene where you can tell where that area is and where it's not, and perhaps then just select this inner part to indicate we want to crop to that selection, right? So the outer part will be removed, and image crop to selection right there, and the entire image sequence is being cropped. And then of course it's no longer 640 by 360, so we may need to resample it, we may need to frame it with something around it. I mean, there's other ways to handle it than by cropping. If you don't care about the slight distortion though, one thing we could do is resample it now at this time. So there it is, resample, and say, okay, let's go back, constrain it, and let's go back to 640. And because we didn't exactly make it the same aspect ratio on cropping, we may need to do something here to correct that a little bit. But we could also actually use this as an opportunity to resample it down if the final result needs to be smaller. 320 by what would that be? Instead of 480, it might be 240. Wait, no, that's not the same aspect ratio. So yeah, let's keep it 640. And then let's let the system do the math for us here. 360. Oh, so that would be 180. Okay, so 320 by 180. 320 by 180. Okay, and so we can resample to that in different levels of quality. So bicubic will take longer, but it will be better quality. Bilinear. Bilinear is probably okay for a quick test. Let's use that. What takes time here is not so much the filtering anyway. I'm on a second generation i7 processor. This can be significantly faster actually if you're on a fourth generation. But I figure you could probably also make it go. What will take time here? Oh, and look at that, we have a little bit of an artifact at the bottom, so we might want to crop that one out as well. So let's go and select this one more time. This time I'm going to select the bottom part here and then reverse the selection, invert alpha, and then crop to that. So image crop to selection. There you go. So you see there's a sequence of different tools and techniques you use, and we now have an animation without any of that strobing, without any of the side effects of the flickering that we had initially, and the only thing left there is just a beautiful animation. And hopefully that'll give you some ideas of how you can work with your Carrara animations and your renders in 3D, no matter what they, what tools they were created in, and use Dogwaffle, the Howler edition in particular, PD Pro Howler, because it is able to do all sorts of animations and filters and post work on your animations as well. All right, thanks for watching. I know this was a very long video recording here, and I hope you enjoy.